Welcome to Civic Warriors, brought to you by Witham. On this podcast, we bring the conversation to you, sharing engaging stories that motivate and build consensus in the nonprofit community. This podcast is about the innovators, the leaders on the front lines of adversity, guiding lights in the nonprofit industry affecting change. And through their stories, we can all join forces to become Civic Warriors. Hey Warriors, welcome to today's episode of Civic Warriors, brought to you by Witham. I'm your host, Brad Caruso, leader of Witham's not-for-profit practice. Today's guest is Jennifer Owens, president and CEO of the Arlington Community Foundation, a 501c3 not-for-profit community foundation. Since 1991, Arlington Community Foundation provides the tools and expertise to personalize and maximize charitable giving, builds connections between community members, resources, and local nonprofits, and drives initiatives and advocacy to create economic opportunities and prevent displacement in Arlington, Virginia. When it comes to making the most of your charitable giving, the best pathway may not always be clear. Whether you're new or an experienced donor, an individual or a corporation, there's no shortage of questions that come up along the way, such as where will my donations make the most impact? How do I know my dollars are being used effectively? What types of assets can I donate? How can I maximize the tax benefits of giving? And the list can go on and on and on. Our goal for today is to provide a little bit of that clarity and answer some of these questions, as well as provide some insight of how the Arlington Community Foundation is approaching some of these matters and helping maximize that impact. So with all that said, Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So let's start out with your background. What is your journey like from starting out in this industry to being the president and CEO of the Arlington Community Foundation?
Well, it won't be any surprise to anyone listening who also works in a community foundation. Not many of us came in a straight path to community foundation work. It's a very flexible tool, and so it attracts those of us who can sometimes have short attention spans and be interested in trying and doing a lot of different things to work against some of the intractable issues in our community. And I started in this field almost 30 years ago with a pretty common story of leaving college and not immediately finding my first job. So I started working for a temp agency. And shortly thereafter, I got a temp job at a private foundation working for a high net worth family here in the Washington, D.C. area. And that set me off on the path. I realized that I really loved the work of helping people to identify and achieve their charitable goals. But doing it just for one family just didn't quite seem like the impact that I wanted to have. They had the resources to hire plenty of Jennifers to do their work. And so I found my way shortly thereafter to community foundations. And I worked for 15 years at the Central New York Community Foundation in both programmatic and development roles. And then 8 years ago, I came here to the Arlington Community Foundation. And I've been really enjoying taking this legacy planning process that we created in Central New York and starting to populate it not only here in Arlington, but around the country.
Love it. And I'm definitely excited to get into the legacy planning topic, as we haven't had a lot of conversation on here. And I know that it's a bigger focus in the world, and one that you've specialized in, which is really exciting to have an expert on. Can you talk about the Arlington Community Foundation a little bit and maybe share some of the focuses of the foundation itself and what you pay attention to there?
Sure. So the Community Foundation is permanent charitable infrastructure in Arlington, just like it is in so many communities where community foundations exist. We've been around just since the early 90s, which is a relative newcomer in the community foundation space. We manage about $60 million in assets across funds like donor advised funds, scholarship funds, designated funds, field of interest, and we hold some agency endowments. But we really focus on three things. We're a grant maker, a convener, and we steward gifts that are entrusted to us for the long term. And that gives us the opportunity sometimes to pick focus areas. And so community foundations like ours scan the community, always looking for what is that intractable issue that can be assisted or can be helped with some engagement from the community foundation. Sometimes that's because there's an opportunity that is present in the community, and sometimes it can be because there's particular donors that have an interest in something. Here in Arlington, most often we hear that displacement of our lowest income neighbors is our biggest threat to the overall viability and diversity of our community. And so we focus on affordable housing, affordable childcare, and then anything that really improves economic mobility for people. So workforce development, scholarships, and other things that help people to have a better prospect for higher incomes.
And I imagine in today's day and age, economic displacement is becoming more and more a topic of focus, and affordable housing. And I know
Hmm.
I'm from the Jersey area, and housing is not affordable whatsoever,
Right.
and
Right.
income streams are changing drastically. So I appreciate you focusing on that, because that
Yeah.
that certainly is a big topic of focus where we are locally as well.
Yeah, we do a lot to make sure that people understand the data too, because in wealthier communities where displacement is prominent, it's also very often the case that people don't understand what is happening in their own communities relative to the lower income members of those communities. And so here we look at the area median income being so high that but there's still 10% of our population that live below 30% of our area median income, which would be a family of four in Arlington, Virginia, living on about $46,000 a year, which is very untenable. And that's far too many people living at that level that can sometimes feel invisible.
Oh, without question. Yeah, we're doing one of the guests I'm having on in the near future is going to talk about that topic further, and talk about what homelessness looks like, as well as what some of the
Yeah.
circumstances many people are, and a lot of what the public displays to you versus what reality is drastically different. So it's
Yeah.
crucial you raising the support and the funding that you do to help your community. It absolutely is crucial. So certainly myself and others definitely appreciate it. So one of the areas of focus and where we wanted to spend our time on this discussion today is to talk about legacy planning. So let's start off real simple. If there's a listener out there who's unsure of what that means, can you just give kind of your definition of what legacy planning is?
It's really deciding what you want your resources and your values to do after you're gone and putting a plan behind it. And that can feel daunting if you don't have a partner to help with that. So our community foundation really focuses on being that resource that people can turn to create something that's actionable and is available to anyone. So it's always been available to the ultra wealthy. I mentioned my early career working for a high net worth family. They've always had the resources to reach out and get that support. But community foundations that focus on legacy like we do really democratize that process and bring it to everyone in our community who wants to make a difference.
Love it. What does the world and the data show you right now on what this transfer of wealth looks like? What are some of the data points with respect to this, and how much wealth does have to transfer in the next X number of years?
Yeah. Well, a lot. And one of the points that comes up in the data, and there's brand new data just now, just this past week from Giving USA, they just released their 2026 numbers. So I have some breaking data on that, but the great wealth transfer is happening. It's been happening. And for those of us in the field, we've been hearing about it. So it's gotten to be a little bit like the sky is falling, where it's always about to be there. The Cerulli does a good data dump, and they did a study that showed that about $124 trillion will change hands through 2048. That's trillion with a T. And that is what they are projecting, is that about 105 trillion of that will flow to heirs, and about 18 trillion will go to charities or to charitable organizations. And really, the work that we do is to try to make sure that more of that money makes its way to charities and less goes to heirs, because we've identified some psychological barriers to the legacy planning process that make it difficult for people to effectively and easily get money to charitable organizations. And so heirs can be sort of the default move for so many people when they're transferring money. But a couple things to note: about $54 trillion of that money is going to move horizontally to spouses first. And so one of the things that we know is that in this data, there's a major story about how women will impact what is going to happen with this money. And so we spend a lot of time working with women who typically outlive their husbands. Let's be honest, folks. So in practice, they're the ones deciding where the family's wealth and its legacy will ultimately go. So as I look across what we do, those without heirs and women are going to be the ones making these decisions. Just this past year, the Giving USA data shows that bequests jumped almost 20% to about $62 billion this past year. And that's the single biggest increase of any source, and the one that really drove a third of all the growth in total giving last year. that's a really important number because it does tell us a lot. But one of the things that it sort of hides is that even though there's that growth, the Giving USA data is a really lumpy and lagging indicator. So when Giving USA gets this data, they're only seeing realized bequests from that year from tax returns and other documents. The biggest individual contributor to that bequest number last year in the Giving USA data was Paul Allen. And Paul Allen, a co-founder of Microsoft, gave a $3.1 billion bequest. But it shows up in the 2025 data. He died in 2018, and he created that intention much earlier than that. And so is it realistic to say that that's money that happened in 2025? Because the other money that is showing as being contributed in 2025 is actual behavior from that year. And all of the bequest information is very old and sometimes can take a long time to flow through to the real numbers. Here locally, we saw that with a local donor named Tom Flournoy, who really identified with us in 2018 that he wanted to support biking infrastructure in the community, and he really wanted to impact low-income neighbors. And so he started working with us. He created a legacy plan. And during the time that he created that legacy plan, he realized he could accelerate that giving to now. So one of the things that he was able to do was to identify a couple of nonprofit organizations that had affordable housing and to give bike and especially e-bike access to those communities so that those folks who lived there could work a little bit further from where they lived. And so what we see in the data is some, big numbers in the wealth transfer as well as the giving that happens annually. But what is under there are these real stories of people who are having impact today and also creating a plan that's going to move through in the future. Brad, one of the things you shared with me when we were planning for this was that your church had actually received a gift from a community foundation through a legacy gift. And I thought maybe we could use that example to highlight a couple of the benefits of working with a community foundation. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came about or what you know about that gift?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. So, ultimately, and I was new to our church's finances recently. And, ultimately, the community foundation had an individual that went to the community foundation, left our name, to the best of my knowledge, with the community foundation. And then ultimately, that gift then came over to us. To the best of my knowledge, I think it was one of those scenarios that ultimately wasn't known. It wasn't necessarily planned or intended, but I think that it took the community foundation kind of connecting the individual with us, but also that individual was obviously a longtime follower and supporter, and I believe parishioner, if I remember correctly, of the church itself. And then then if you go to the other side of the fence, the community foundation was working with that individual, and the stars aligned with respect to making that happen. So I don't have a ton of knowledge on the background of it, but I do know that we were a very, very fortunate recipient, and it did immensely help us to be able to support the mission of the parish, obviously. So yeah, it was really cool when that stuff happens, but it does feel a little bit like, sometimes happenstance, or at least, me working with a lot of charities too. A lot of times people are like, I don't even know where this came from. It's interesting how a lot of those stories come about of bequests and transfers and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if I could, I think, sum up one tagline for community foundations, helping stars align, which is a term you just used, would be something that I would say is we're the ones working behind the scenes to try to make those things that appear to come out of nowhere actually happen, because we know that it takes careful planning and work to truly implement those plans and to make sure that those things happen. And what I imagine happening in your case is what happens every day here at the Arlington Community Foundation, which is we sit down with someone and start talking about their interests, and they mention their church and they mention their alma mater, and they talk about some organizations in the place that they grew up that helped them when they were young, and they talk about the scholarship that they received, and they mention all of these things, and then we help them to articulate their values, to really document what they want to have happen when they're gone. And they can do that anonymously with us. So maybe that person was still coming to church every week and didn't want everyone to know that they were planning to leave that money, thinking that that might change some of the friendships and dynamics within the church. That anonymity is something that community foundations allow. And so that gives people the freedom to talk, frankly, with their charitable planning professional at the community foundation about what they want to accomplish and the best way to do that. There may very well have been a provision in there that said, if this church has closed or if something has changed that is a direction I don't want to see the church taking, then that could have triggered something inside the community foundation that would have redirected it. So the plan at community foundations have so much more flexibility than what they would have if they were introduced directly through the estate planning documents, because those would not have the flexibility of caveats and other things that community foundations afford people.
Oh, without a doubt. And the infrastructure to be able to facilitate that and carry out donor intent to the letter of the law. I think that's often overlooked, and it's a challenging process. The other thing that I see often too, and I talk to a lot of my tax folks about this, but one of the other extreme benefits, not only with the legacy giving, but just giving in general with going through the community foundation is, as many people know, the tax laws have changed drastically surrounding year-over-year gifts. And, I would imagine, much of the world doesn't necessarily itemize deductions as much as they used to 5 years ago as a result of a lot of the changes that ran through there. And so, using community foundation itself, not only as a tax giving vehicle, but a giving vehicle in current times as well as long term, it's developing that relationship in current times that goes a long way. And to your point, you have a lot of that knowledge and experience to help facilitate multiple types of giving. It's not just current giving, it's not just legacy giving, but you can help someone in their entire life cycle of helping them meet their charitable giving intent. So definitely something that I've heard a lot internally. The benefit of using a donor advised fund, the benefit of working with the community foundation itself.
And the differences in the tax law changes actually had a big impact on what data we have as well. So there's the true, what happens from a behavioral economics perspective when you change the tax incentives for giving, increasing standard deductions, changing the level at which an estate becomes taxable. All of those things can have some impact, but where we really struggle is in the data, because those estate tax returns, your individual tax returns, all of that data, if you're not itemizing or you're not having to submit that, we don't often have a window into what was the behavior. And so maybe giving went down individually, but we're seeing it go up, but yet fewer people are itemizing. So how many people is it changing their behavior, and how many people are still doing that, but we just don't have as much of a window into it as we once did.
Well, it brings up an interesting point too of how easy or hard is it to track that data? How easy is it to track? Because obviously a lot of estate giving, especially, I imagine, is private, to your point before about anonymity and not every estate individual wants to let everybody know where their money is going. It's a very private conversation and a confidential conversation. So I imagine even as a charitable organization, community foundation, or another, let's just say a 501c3 out there, it's probably very difficult to track all of that data and actually know what bequests are coming. Where are we named in a will? Where are we named in some type of trust or giving document? I know, here auditor hat comes on sometimes, and as the accountant in me, we often come across clients and we find out 5 years later, like, oh, by the way, you were added to this irrevocable trust 10 years ago, and by the way, that should have been recorded 10 years ago. It happens all the time, and the charity's like, we had no idea that ever existed, and it's like, I don't blame you. Like, it's very difficult to know sometimes, but you do need to know. To your point, there's an extreme transfer of wealth happening. There is an extreme amount of money that's going to transfer, and having those relationships and having a knowledge of that, because it could be something like you said, it was named in 2018 and cash flow might hit in 2025 or 2035 or later down the road. So for planning purposes, it's certainly important to know that.
And community foundations have we have so much experience with estate giving that From the administration side, the partnership with a community foundation for an individual who's administering an estate, people think of identifying their estate administrator as like picking the, best man in their wedding. They think of it as honorific, but you're giving a huge, mostly, thankless job to someone who you care for that may not have any expertise in it. And so if the charitable portion of that estate is going through a community foundation, it really saves all of the hassle of identifying and notifying each of the underlying organizations that are ultimately going to receive funding, where maybe the name wasn't accurate in the will document, or there's two organizations with a similar name, or it's a very small volunteer organization and they don't know what to do with the documents that they're receiving that they're expected to sign and send back in a timely manner. And so all of that slows things up for everyone. So when you can do the one-stop shop of a community foundation, you have a partner that is going to support your estate administrator, and also to be able to be very clear in what the next steps are and how to keep that moving forward so it doesn't take so long to settle an estate.
Yeah, that expertise is second to none. And we're entering this day and age of artificial intelligence and all these tools out there, and you can get answers at your fingertips, but I don't think you can uncomplicate the estate planning process. You can ask questions, but you really need to work with a person who's going to really help you, because it can go wrong really quickly from what I've seen in my experience.
AI would be there to confirm how difficult it will be.
You can ask it the question, and I guarantee it'll say, it does not compute. Yeah, laws change every day.
Right.
How complicated, in your opinion, is the estate planning process, and why? Why does that? Why do we overcomplicate this?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think that the majority of people think that the complexity comes from the fact that there's a lot of legal things to know. There's a lot of, options related to wills and irrevocable trusts and other types of assets that you might hold that might be more complicated to deal with. But I think what we know is that the much more, prescient variable for most people is the idea that there is a human, emotional factor to this. So it forces you to confront your mortality, your family dynamics, fairness among your heirs. I think, people have a million lawyers they can reach out to structure, a charitable remainder trust or a generation skipping trust. But what do they do to get advice on what to do when they have one child who has been fantastically financially successful and another who hasn't, and they're looking at what to do with the assets, and do they divide them equally, or do they divide them proportional to the need of their children? All of those questions are much, much more difficult for them to get assistance with. And so we help people talk through those issues. So estate planning itself is complex, but very highly known by many, many people. You can walk around almost any community and identify many, many lawyers, especially in the Washington, D.C. region. But what is more difficult is identifying someone who can help you through the psychological and emotional questions that you need to deal with, and to give you the kind of fortitude to think about your own mortality in a way that says, I really want to plan ahead so that what happens with my money is what will make me feel like I ultimately have great purpose.
Yeah, I just went through my wife and I just went through partially going through this process. We realized 10 years into having kids, we're like, we probably should have a will. We probably should actually dictate some of these things, legally, if in case, the worst happens, and we hope that doesn't. But we just went through that process, and I would say that we found a very, very solid attorney who helped us, and it was wonderful. It was a good process. But first off, finding that attorney, there are 1,000,001 people out there that can help, and it was finding someone that we trusted that we could work with, and also somebody that works with like everybody in the ecosystem too. It was like, oh, we have investments here, we have assets here, we do X, we do Y, and we're not uber wealthy, but it's still considerations that you have to play in, and then you have family members, and so many considerations that I'm happy we went through that process. But yeah, I think we waited 10 years too long. Part of me thinks that we did, and it was complicated. I don't even understand the documents I signed. I probably shouldn't say that publicly, but I'm reading all this stuff, and I'm like, if it's happening the way it's saying it's happening, then yeah, I agree. But like, do I really understand what all these terms mean? I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah, it has a lot of cascade, and people get tripped up on the paperwork for sure, and it's hard to understand and all of that. But if you trust the attorney that you're working with, and by the way, your community foundation may very well be able to help with identifying estate planning attorneys because of our broad interaction with so many. We can often understand what you're looking for and help direct you to an estate planning attorney if you aren't already connected with one. But I think community foundations make the other part of it feel more human and doable. So your plan may have something that says, if all of my heirs have passed and there's no one left, then here's a charitable organization. But maybe in 25 years, you'll want to revisit that. But that charitable organization that you put in your document right now may be completely irrelevant to where you are in 20 years when you're saying, you know what, my kids have launched, they're doing great. I'd like to leave more of this somewhere else.
Oh, it's definitely it definitely changes over time. So kind of drill into that further and talking about your community foundation a bit further. What is the value proposition that you bring to this legacy planning process? How do you go about that? And why, just to further solidify, why should an individual or why could an individual go to the community foundation for its legacy planning needs?
Legacy is I think the one true value proposition of a community foundation. Plenty of organizations can take your annual gift and help you with current giving, but the holistic lifelong legacy approach, which is sitting with someone, understanding their whole picture and building a plan that serves every cause they love, is one of the only things genuinely unique to our platform. Anywhere else, you really get this if you're an ultra high net worth or you pay handsomely to hire someone to do it for you. But we make it available to everyone in the community. And that's why we see doing this and doing it right as really the truest gift we can give to our community. We are here for the long haul. We have the ability to honor your wishes in a way that is much more nuanced than most other organizations can. And while many of the things that we do, I think we do very well, this is the one thing that we really don't have many people who compete with us to do it because it is a labor of love. It's part of our mission. So while it's not always exceptionally efficient to work with people in this way, what it does at the end of the day is creates a value for our community that is part of why we exist, to sit with people and have those thoughtful conversations. And that's really something that is very, very unique to community foundations.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think when I always think about it too, I say to myself, who else is an organization that kind of has the relationship with every party it needs to? Right. A lot of the community foundations we work with have an investment strategy and can pool the money to invest it so that it not only, they don't have to go outside necessarily. It's a pool investment. You have a lot of relationships with, outside parties that can help whether it's, accounting, tax, attorneys, things like that. The charities that are in your local region and how they operate, and you work with them probably on a relatively frequent basis, or at least there's a connection that you feel. And also you're local to that community, and most people are going to your community foundation as they probably are local. They care about Arlington, they care about the community itself, and you have that local knowledge as well as the kind of impact statement. You know where the money's going to go. You've seen it tried and true for many, many years. And so that adds an element of confidence. So it's rare that you find that. And I know just, if I take off my, Witham accountant auditor hat and I just go to Brad, the individual with a wife and 2 kids, I look at myself and I'm like, I probably wouldn't know where to go, to be quite honest. I wouldn't know how to navigate that. And a lot of the time too, you know what your causes are. You participate in them every day. I go to church, I go to my firehouse where I volunteer, and yeah, at some point there's probably going to be legacy giving, that's going to go to those places. But, I don't know that, not everyone has that necessarily, directly volunteering, directly doing those things where it's easy. But they do want to make a difference in their community, and they do want to make a difference. So I see the value proposition greatly for the community foundation world. So it definitely helps individuals navigate that and provide the most impact as a result of the, full suite of services you offer.
Well, and if you want to, if you're intending to set up something that's permanent and durable, the community foundation is your hedge against something that changes at the fire station or in your church that You would rather have the community foundation look back at what they know about you and pick the next best thing when something happens. How many community foundations have funds that they've had to, vary the purpose for over time to match the donor's intent when something has happened. And it's not always something that we can foresee. And that's the point, is that the community foundations are sort of that third party that's there really on the side of you as a donor, even after you're gone, making sure that what you wanted to have accomplished is what's going to really happen.
Yeah. And I think somewhat related, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but, exactly related to that concept, we hear this term and I hear it a lot in the accounting and audit world of variance power, right? It's this concept, to your point, of, well, how do you carry that out? How do you get that? Can you maybe tell our audience a little bit about what that topic means and kind of how it plays out? What is variance power and how does that play into this plan giving topic?
So variance power is really the legal authority of a community foundation's board to modify a restriction or condition on a fund if it becomes unnecessary, incapable of fulfillment, or inconsistent with the charitable needs in the community. And it's really exercised at our judgment and the judgment of our board. And it doesn't need the donor to be still living and to weigh in on it. It doesn't require that the beneficiary approve of the plan. And it also doesn't require us to go back to the courts to make that change. So if something happens with an organization and it ceases to exist, or its purpose changes and it's inconsistent with what the donor wanted, we can make that change without holding things up. So if your local symphony closes down, which it did in an instance at my previous community foundation, we were able to more quickly move forward with a varied purpose for the funds that were left in trust of the community foundation for that organization, because we didn't have to wait for the courts to work through that process. Similarly, as community foundations get older, more than 100 years of experience, we know that some issues actually do get solved. It doesn't feel like it very often. But when an issue gets solved and you have funds for that particular purpose, you're able to really move forward. So a community foundation that has funds to help eradicate polio might now be using that to help with other disease research, because we've already figured out how to eliminate the polio epidemic. So that issue of being able to be nimble and change, sometimes variance power gets looked at very skeptically, like, well, it just gives you the power to do anything that you want with those funds. But in reality, what it's giving you as the donor is the opportunity to know that the relevance of what you want to have accomplished is not going to get stymied by bureaucracy.
Yeah, and there's certainly public discourse on it, but the reality is that it's an upfront conversation, right? Like it's hey, this is the why behind it, and just as you said, there's a lot of reasons why you would do that, and flexibility and nimbleness is often overlooked, and it usually doesn't come up until there's a problem. It doesn't come up until there's some either, I've seen it, a lot of community foundations that we've worked with in the past, or organizations, they work with natural disasters. Well, you can't wait.
Right.
Displacement happens immediately. Same thing. Right. People don't track the courts, but I imagine there's a time period in which, legal things can go on for years and years and years and years and years and just keep tacking that on. Whereas, what's the intent of that donation? It's to support that cause. It's not to get locked up in a court somewhere to not make that impact. So certainly from that perspective, I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. And the other thing that comes often with, I think, especially with, variance power, is that I think people underestimate the long-term thinking of a community foundation. And so while variance power gives us a lot of flexibility, if we don't use it responsibly, it's like any other power. If, with great power comes great responsibility. And how long would we be able to attract new donors to our work if we were known to be the kind of people that just willy-nilly make a change to someone's wishes with their estate gift, and that it would take no time at all for us to sort of be putting ourselves out of business.
Oh, completely. Yeah. No, public, there's legal and then there's public relations, and you have to play by both sets of rules. And it's not for, of course, I imagine that this world, regardless of whether you follow the donor's intent in the law, gets contentious, because there might be individuals in a line of a family tree that get upset that, that's the direction. And I imagine that, if it gets challenged in court, you follow the legal paperwork and, you're very transparent about it. And like you said, the purpose of the community foundation is a long-term approach. It's not a, hey, let's just accept this gift and then deny their wishes because we want to hold on to the money. Like the public thinks that, you need to look into it a little further because it's very, very far away from the reality of it. Right. And I imagine things get conflated. Like you hear about places that are donor advised funds versus maybe a community foundation that holds donor advised funds. They might be, different kinds of vehicles, because one might be a in and out, a short-term giving vehicle, whereas you're more a long-term giving vehicle and a relationship building. I'm not saying the other ones aren't, but there are different models out there and that exist.
Yeah. As we're working through right now with, there's sort of been a very hot topic recently when some of the major commercial donor advised funds, Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, made the choice to stop allowing donor advised fund grants out to Southern Poverty Law Center. And that's become a real flashpoint and has led to an uptick in community foundations seeing people convert their donor advised funds from those commercial providers to community foundations, specifically because they feel that we're going to have more fidelity to, pun intended, to their wishes.
Love it. Very interesting point. And that this is becoming more and more public as there is becoming more and more, I don't know what the term is, polarization, changes in the government, changes in things going on. So you are starting to see positions being taken on certain matters. And when you sign that piece of paper, you are beholden to those positions that are taken. And so it is important to find that long-term partner. So we have a lot of individuals in the audience who work at not-for-profits who are probably hearing this conversation and say, what do I do? How do I take that next step? Because we know that, regular giving is status quo, maybe down a little bit, maybe up a little bit. But we know that, we're here for the long run. And we know we have a very, very strong constituency that likes to donate to us. How do they start their planned giving journey?
Sure. So nonprofits often partner with their local community foundations. So one of the things that we do is help those organizations to think through how to do this. And so here's sort of the tips that we give them. We ask them to start where they already have loyalty to your point. They know who those donors are. So the most consistent, longest tenure donors are certainly your legacy donors. So have those conversations with them. I think people get very caught up thinking that they need to know the perfect way to bring it up, but it's just like any other conversation. You're helping that person to identify a new and maybe different way than they thought of in the past to help your organization. And that is bringing their lives meaning and purpose. And so you're assisting them in connecting to something that is going to deepen the meaning of their lives. So I often use that as a way to help people get over the feeling that they're putting some burden on someone by even bringing up this opportunity, and make the first ask very simple. So a bequest or a beneficiary designation really doesn't cost the donor anything today. So it's a very low barrier entry point for people. It's in many ways a much easier ask than something where you're asking them to take money out of their current cash flow. And so you're really giving them the opportunity to do something at a time when it won't have as much of an impact on their, potential to fund their own futures. When you work with a community foundation, I would also say that it gives you the opportunity to take a warm donor, someone that is interested in a legacy gift to your organization, but you can tell that there's some hesitation. That hesitation is almost always either related to those psychological barriers that we talked about before, thinking about their own mortality, identifying how much is going to go to charity versus heirs. And it's also often because they have so many other organizations, and it's a very daunting idea to think about if they were to go one by one to all of these organizations. They also often don't want to tell you necessarily that they're planning to do it because they're afraid that either they'll outlive their money or they will change their minds. And so they don't want to feel very penned into that. So when you have a donor that you're thinking, this is someone I know, they've been consistent, they care about our organization, suggest they talk to their local community foundation about creating a plan that includes your organization. And that is a great relationship for them. So you've provided value to them by, setting them up with a partner that can help them think through some of these big questions. They may not recognize or know that the community foundation exists, or if they do know it exists, they don't think of it in this context. And it's a way to make sure that that donor doesn't pass away without completing that work. So if you connect them with a partner that can really make it happen, you mentioned you should have done your will 10 years ago, a lot can happen in the blink of an eye. And so you don't want to wait on these relationships. Those people are ready and primed to be introduced, and that can benefit your organization. So while it feels a little strange to give up that, some of the control over that relationship, I promise you that just like in the case with the bequest that you just received at your church, that there are gifts that would otherwise not have happened at all, but for the community foundation's involvement.
Without question. And a lot of them are actually game-changing donations. They're donations that change the dynamic of organizations in the sense that, hey, maybe yesterday, an organization's operating day to day, and today, hey, we actually need an investment policy. We need to invest this, and we can continue to partner with our community foundation, or we can continue to do that work. And it also helps you evolve as a charity in cases of getting a larger gift like that. Yep. And the more that you can plan for it, the better. Sometimes it's hard to just react to it. Appreciate those words of wisdom, and I know with a lot of the community foundations we work with, they partner with the local not-for-profits and vice versa, and they're always willing to have those conversations because it benefits everybody.
And I mean, if you think about the in the new Giving USA data that came out last week, bequest giving was 10% of all giving, and corporate giving was 7%. So 40% more dollars came to charities in the U.S. last year through bequest giving than corporate giving. And think of how many boardrooms of nonprofits are so focused on how do we get to the corporate community? What do we need to do? Those conversations are so much more high barrier than the conversations with individuals about including you in their estate. They're much more sticky, so they're much more likely to follow through on that and be long-term relationships for you. And when you look back on transformative points in various organizations, a lot of airtime is given right now to the Mackenzie Scott money when that comes out. Those are transformative moments for organizations, but many, many more times than it's Mackenzie Scott. It's, Jane Doe, who volunteered every day at the animal shelter for 10 years and leaves the organization multiple millions of dollars. Those are much, much more common and equally as transformative for the organizations that receive them. And because you don't know they're coming, that is a great time to reach out to your community foundation, because it can be, a blessing and a curse to receive something like that in one lump sum. And you need a partner that can help you think about how to increase your own capacity and support you in that process.
Yeah. And there's a lot behind that with the corporate donation versus individual donation and estate giving and all. The tax laws have overcomplicated, but also have changed to the point where some of the tax law actually drives that as well. And I'm always fascinated whenever I'm working with a client, work with a lot of 501c3 charities and foundations and other types of organizations. And there's nothing I enjoy more than when I'm just talking to them and they're like, hey, guess what? We just got a $10 million gift. I was like, yes, like it saved them. Yeah. Like it makes me so happy that there are people that care so much about their organization and the work they do. It speaks volumes to the work they do, but it also just speaks volumes to the generosity of the world and also, the wealth of the world. There are a lot of people that have a lot of wealth, because I'm like, oh, they wrote that check to you and 10 other organizations. I'm like, wow, some people really have some money out there.
Right.
But
and it happens in communities, like ours, where there's so much wealth that, a school teacher that bought a house here in the 1960s in Arlington and worked away in the schools as a teacher for 40 years and found now that their house, or at least the plot of land that it's sitting on, is worth, $2 million or $1 million, and they have savings and they, have no direct heirs. That's a real potential. And oftentimes those folks have not been major donors over their lifetime. So they may not be on the radar screens of all the organizations. And that's really what the Community Foundation is here to reach out to. We are working all the time to identify those folks who maybe aren't on the radar screens of the organizations and make sure that now that the person does have capacity and is in a place to make that transformative gift, that they're supported, because they haven't been making, those major gifts over time.
Yeah, it's incredible. I'm at down the beach this week. We've been coming to this beach in New Jersey. It's actually where I grew up as well. And I mean, I know people that told me, they bought a house in 1970 for $20,000, and I go look up the current value. I'm like, whoa! Talk about the value of real estate. It's impressive, and on top of the jealousy of seeing some of these houses and being like, man, how nice would it be to have that house on the beach? But it's incredible. It's incredible, and to your point earlier, and to a lot of this discussion, at some point, that wealth may transfer, and there are a lot of individuals that develop that wealth, and we've been fortunate to live in this country and have that opportunity to do that, and certainly appreciate that your organization is a community foundation, as well as many others out there, are doing that work to just really help provide that trust to the public and help with that transfer. So last question that I have for you is, how can the public help the Arlington Community Foundation? Where would you like the public to focus on, and how can they reach out to you to get more information if they need it?
Sure. Well, certainly I would love to have anyone who's considering leaving any amount of their assets to charity to come talk to their community foundation, whether it's here or somewhere else. Community foundations are one of the most, I think, unsung heroes in many, many communities. We have geographic boundaries, but we also work with people across geographies. So people come to the Arlington Community Foundation and they may want to support their hometown in Oregon, as well as some things here. And so that network of community foundations is a very powerful thing for people to tap into. So when you reach out to your local community foundation, they're going to be able to help you, whether your interests are local, national, international. We have in the DC region many, many people with international interests, and we help them to even design plans that include places that I sometimes have to look up on a map to see where they even are because of their foreign service experience. As we move forward, we're here to help nonprofits. So if you're a nonprofit in the local community here or any community where you have a community foundation, make sure those folks at the community foundation know what you're about and what your goals are as an organization. Reach out to them with the challenges that you're having, because many community foundations have very specific dollars set aside for very discrete things, field of interest funds that may be for something that you work on that maybe they're not aware that you are working on, and maybe they can drive some of those resources to you. Right now, because of so much change in the federal funding landscape and other things, many community foundations are doing what we do, which is providing money in the community under a banner called Meeting the Moment. And that Meeting the Moment money is for capacity building, helping organizations to create opportunities for their staff to get rejuvenated and, stay strong in the work, or to relook at their business model so that they can, move forward in this, changing and very unsettled environment. And as we think about ways for the community to be involved here, we also have some opportunities for volunteering at the Community Foundation. And that includes every spring when we have hundreds of people who read scholarship applications. And that can be a real window of opportunity for people in the Arlington community to really see what it is that the youth and the young people in our community are struggling with, and what their hopes and dreams are. And I think the more we support the young people in our community, the more likely they are to come back and choose to make Arlington their home, and to really help us with that displacement issue. So my hope is that we can, you can visit our website at www.arlcf.org. So arlcommunityfoundation.org. And that will give you some many, many pathways into the work that we're doing on affordable housing, if those are your interests, and so many more topics. And if you are in Arlington or in any community that has a community foundation and you have a passion and you're just wishing you had someone that could help you to see it through, go see your local community foundation.
Love it. I love that message. I love the development of the next generation. I'm a huge advocate of that. I coach a lot of kids sports, and I realize the impact that you can have just volunteering your time. But also, building the community. It's not easy to keep everybody local. And the more that you can work with local organizations like yourself to make that happen makes a difference. So, yeah, Jennifer, really thank you for being here today. Thank you for dedicating your time and sharing a lot more information on your expertise and wisdom and all the great work that you're doing at the Community Foundation. It doesn't go unnoticed, and I really appreciate you dedicating your time with us today.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for all Wisdom does in the community.
Love it. Love every minute of it. Warriors, thank you for listening. Subscribe and meet us right back here for another episode of With Them Civic Warriors. Bye, everybody.